All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar presented by Women of CALCIMA. We're going to go ahead and get started since we only have an hour, and I know Tobias has a lot of content for you guys today. So I'd like to welcome Tobias Pagel, who is the founder and CEO of Liberty, a company that creates workwear exclusively for women in the heavy industry. And before he, created and founded Liberty, Tobias actually worked for Cemex. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Tobias.
Thank you very much, Abby. Good morning to everybody. I really want to thank Stephanie and Abby for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about this important subject. Abby said, my name is Tobias. I started Liberty 4 years ago. We exclusively create workwear for women in heavy duty industries, and we do not create any workwear for men. They already have enough options out there. Abby, since it's a virtual meeting, just to get a feel for the virtual room, how many participants do we have in today's webinar?
Right now we have 15 people in.
15. And could you give me an indication of how many men and how many women we have?
It looks like, just from looking at names, looks like there's 14 women and then one
man. Okay, I'm asking because usually what I have encountered over the course of the last 4 years, as I've had many conversations about this topic, is that it's familiar territory for women, obviously. So a lot of the things I think that the women on this call are going to hear is a confirmation of what many of you probably have experienced. And for men, not so much. For men, oftentimes it is fairly eye-opening, and it is oftentimes something entirely new that they have never thought about, and they're oftentimes unaware that there is an issue at all. I have a hypothesis, and I want to throw out that hypothesis. And my hypothesis is that if a company is serious about safety from a value perspective, and if a company is serious about wanting to attract more women, then it is impossible that that company provides women with men's PPE. And the goal of today's presentation is to back up that hypothesis with data, with facts, and by introducing a few concepts about psychology at work. And so hopefully at the end of this presentation, you walk away and you agree with my hypothesis. What's on the agenda today? I would briefly like to give you a little bit of my personal background. I would then like to talk about the challenge that exists and give you some survey data as to how many women are impacted by the challenge to find proper personal protective clothing or personal protective equipment. I would like to frame the problem, but also the benefits of proper workwear and the disadvantages of ill-fitting workwear. I want to talk about why fit matters so much, and that comes down to talking about average differences of physical differences between men and women. I want to talk and introduce some psychological concepts why not just fit matters, and it's not just about safety, but there are cultural and psychological aspects that also have to be taken into consideration when it comes to clothing, and especially clothing in a work environment. And then very briefly, I want to present to you that there are a number of solutions out there by now, and what has to be done to address this challenge and what can be done by all of us. So workwear is a huge umbrella. You know, anything from office attire to the uniforms that first responders wear is essentially falls under that umbrella of workwear. It is very important, and there are two aspects that stand out. One, it is the functional properties of the very clothing that meets the demands of the job. Think about a firefighter. But it is also about meeting the cultural norms of the group that you are working in. And just imagine that you hop on an airplane and you expect the pilot to look like a pilot, but instead you find somebody who's wearing a lab coat that is about to maneuver that airplane. And you're probably going to sink into your seat, and you're a little unsure whether that's the right person for the job. That is because we take a lot of clues from clothing. Today, however, we are only going to talk about, when I refer to workwear, I'm only going to refer to the type of workwear that we use in what I call heavy duty industries, whether that's construction materials, agriculture, transportation, etc. The wider umbrella, clothing falls into the wider umbrella in these industries that we're referring to of PPE, personal protective equipment. PPC, personal protective clothing, is a subsegment thereof. And HVSA, high visibility safety apparel, is another subsegment thereof. And those are the two. The HVSA we will talk a little bit about today, high vis gear, and then in the wider context, workwear for these type of manual intensive, labor intensive industries.
Yeah, I think it might actually be all week.
So the topic is the psychological and practical benefits of well-fitting PPE for women. So some of you may wonder, why is this dude talking to us about that topic, especially since I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a health and safety expert, and I'm clearly not a woman. I have had a background for the most part of my career in construction materials. I worked for Cemex for a decade. I worked for Cemex in Germany. I worked for them in Mexico and all across the United States. In the US, it's the largest construction materials company for cement, concrete, and aggregates, which is sand, gravel, and rock. I managed a logistics company that was focused on shipping cars and car logistics. And I briefly worked for a heavy equipment training company. And in all of those industries, I noticed the poor conundrum, the terrible choice that most women face. And it's a choice of bad or bad. If they want to wear the proper attire from a safety perspective, then usually, for the most part, they have to wear men's gear, which usually, for the most part, does not fit them. It's usually too large and it's bulky. It doesn't sit right. And that has a number of implications that we'll go in and go over later in this webinar. Or they wear something that is actually comfortable. They go rope, quote unquote, and I've seen a number of women do that, just born out of the nature of being unable to actually, especially physically, work, or not being happy with the way that they look. And so they go out on their own and buy attire that is actually comfortable to work in, with the downside that oftentimes it is not up to code, it is not up to the standard, and hence they can put themselves at risk. But that is the poor choice that a lot of women face. And so in 2019, I started a company that exclusively, like I said before, creates workwear for women. And the mission is very simple. Workwear that fits right, is made right, of high quality, and looks right. Looks appealing, looks fashionable, fits a woman's body. When I started this journey at the beginning of 2019, the first thing, and even before that, before I started that journey, I just sat down with a lot of women, ranging from tradeswomen, carpenters, roofers, welders, singlers, to project supervisors, project managers in construction companies, architects, engineers. And I asked them questions. And for the most part, there were a number of things, there were a number of common threads and commonalities. But one very clear one was, we don't have it, we do need it. And I don't want anything fancy. I definitely don't want anything pink. I just want what that guy has, but made to fit my body. Nothing else. Please don't shrink it and pink it. But just give me that type of quality, and please give me a lot of pockets. Pockets was a thread that was that almost every woman to this day that I talk to mentions the need for pockets that are not just decorative, that you can actually use. And so that's been the mission of Liberty. We have had now full inventory for a year. The pandemic obviously impacted us. We had a soft launch at the beginning of 2021. And now for a little bit more than a year, we've had full inventory of all of our collections, including a high visibility safety apparel line for women. Now, is there really a problem with women's workwear? And the reason why I asked this provocatively is because that is what I'm being asked when I talk to men. When I talk to men, they look at me and they're saying, what's the issue? What is the problem? We give women workwear as we are required to do. And so let's look at that for a second. There are a number of surveys that have been conducted, especially over the last 2 decades. The picture, unfortunately, has not changed much. This study may be a little bit older, it's 10 years old, but I've looked at studies and surveys that were conducted 4, 5, 3 years ago. They all still paint very much the same picture. This was done here by the University of Minnesota. They talked to women in the construction industry, women that actually needed PPE on a regular basis. And what you can see is that 95% of the women in this survey said they need to wear PPE. For the vast majority of them, 3/4, the contractor provided that PPE, and more than 90% did not receive PPE that was made for women. It was men's PPE. And by the way, if it says unisex, it is never unisex. Unisex usually means it's made for men, but they just want to market it to women as well. So unisex usually does not mean it is made for women. More than 90% of women do not receive PPE, and that is a consistent trend. Oftentimes the numbers are even higher, 95, 96%. So I have a question, and if anybody who has the courage to speak up and turn on their microphone, if not, if you could use the comment section that Abby is monitoring. Is there anybody on this call out of the 14 women that has received PPE specifically for women by their employer?
Got one person that said no. Someone said only because they buy it for themselves.
Right, but not provided by the employer. So on this call, which is a small sample group of 14, it's not representative. But this group, our group right now, is worse off. So now we have 100% of women, and I don't know if all of you need it, but definitely 100% of women that do not receive PPE provided by their employer. By the way, I forgot to mention one thing. There is a Q&A session at the end, but I'm very comfortable if there's anything, since we're going to take a look at quite a few slides, if there's anything that pops up immediately, please feel free to either raise your virtual hand or use the comment section. Abby will be monitoring it, and you guys can interrupt me at any point in time if there's a burning question that you would like to ask. How many women are impacted by that? Right before the pandemic, it was just more than 1 million women. Right now, as many of you have probably read, actually during the pandemic, more women have joined the construction universe. It has surpassed more than 10% for the first time. So we're talking about more than 1 million women in the construction industry alone. And out of those, there are 330,000 women that actually work in operational roles, whether that is tradeswomen or project supervisor, project managers, but they need to have PPE on a daily basis. By today, that is probably even a higher number. And that is only the construction industry. So there are a number of other so-called non-traditional industries that face the exact same problem, and that's the transportation industry, whether it's railroads or trucking, airline industry, utilities, agriculture. In a lot of those industries, women have the exact same problem. So truly, we're talking about millions of women in the United States that have a problem of finding proper PPE, and certainly it not being provided by their employers to them. Why is that? There are a number of reasons. This is by no means a complete list. It is essentially the outcome of me having been involved in this topic and having researched it heavily over the course of the last 5 years, even before I started Liberty. And I believe that the biggest reason that I come across as I talk to a lot of men in particular is ignorance. It is pure ignorance about the fact that they are entirely unaware, oftentimes, especially male decision makers, that there is even an issue. And I'm genuinely being asked when I have that conversation with men or being told that I wasn't aware that there was anything that there was anything going on, that's a need, that's a challenge, that they can find it, that they need it in the first place. I talked to a safety manager or safety professional, health and safety professional last week in Illinois, who's been in the industry for 25 years. And he is now organizing a trade show for a number of unions in Northern Illinois. And during the call, he mentioned a number of times, I'm embarrassed, but up until a year ago, I was totally oblivious about this entire topic. It never crossed my mind. I think another big issue is lack of regulation. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, so I don't want to steal the thunder. But right now, the key regulation that defines the properties of workwear, and especially high-vis gear, is ANSI 107. And ANSI 107 says that the gear needs to fit, but there is no mentioning of it being gender specific. And the fact that it has to fit is a very loose definition that can be bent in any form or fashion. There is definitely the fact that there are a lot of companies have established suppliers, and life is easy if you continue to doing what you've always done. Life gets hard when you have to identify new vendors, when you have to onboard new vendors, and you have to test them and try them out. And oftentimes it is just comfort to do what you've always been doing. And a lot of the established PPE vendors and distributors, a lot of them have unfortunately still not added women's PPE to their catalog. And if they do, sometimes it's more an alibi effort than a true effort of adding a true comprehensive collection. There's unawareness, and that I find across both genders. I think there's unawareness among men, but there's also oftentimes unawareness of even the existence of workwear and high-vis and different options for women among women. I think also it is one problem of many that women face in non-traditional, so-called non-traditional employment roles. Problems that are much more quote unquote important, such as ranging from sexual harassment all the way to violence and hostile work environments. So for many associations that try to combat women's issues in general, workwear is just one of many problems, and a lot of the others are much more prevalent and much more important to battle, rightfully so. There is a disbelief among employers oftentimes. So for the most part, almost all companies that I've talked to, which are either headed by men on the general manager level or on the safety level, I get told that this is interesting and they can certainly relate to that, but at their company, they don't have that problem. And the reason is that we don't receive any complaints. We give women the PPE that everybody else gets, and we make sure it's more or less in the right size. So, and we don't get any complaints. So we just don't have that problem. And when I ask them whether they also actively ask their women, then usually the answer is no, they haven't done that. That's a good point. And I think it's a mistake to think that only because there are no complaints that there is no issue. And the reason is, and again, I've talked to a lot of women about that, the men are not lying that say that there are no complaints. But it's totally understandable that for a lot of women, which are already in the minority, which are trying to fit in, which have to tackle a whole range of challenges at their work, that the last thing that they want to do is to be branded as a troublemaker. And so for the most part, indeed, most women do not complain about the lack of proper PPE, at least not to their employers. And then the elephant in the room, I think, is the last point, which is a very important one, which is that for the most part, in a male-dominated industry, such as the construction industry, the mining industry, and many other industries, decision makers are men, and they are suffering from gender bias. And I would like to talk about briefly, give you guys a comparison, why that is interesting, and why I think that gender bias plays a huge role as a reason for the lack of proper workwear for women. As I had said, there are about 330,000 women that need PPE on a daily basis. And there is, surprisingly, and that's just pure chance, there's the about same amount of male nurses where the picture is reversed. Men are in the minority in the traditionally female employment role, and men have entered that career more and more over the last couple of decades. And now there's about, in absolute terms, about same number of tradeswomen or women in operational roles in construction as there are male nurses. One of those markets is well served, and that's the male nurse apparel market. Men can find scrubs in any color and shape and size, and they can do so very, very easily. And it is provided, for the most part, by their employers. There are not many men that wear improper fitting scrubs. And that's not the case for tradeswomen. That is not the case for women that work in construction, who for the most part, as we've established and looked at the data supporting it, who still have to wear men's PPE and men's personal protective clothing. I want to digress just real quick and talk about gender bias and why gender bias is such a huge issue, and why I think it is still the driving force behind the lack of this. And by looking at something totally unrelated in sports. Soccer is not a popular sport in the US. I born and raised in Germany. It is a huge issue anywhere outside of the United States. It's a huge thing in Germany, certainly. And even though I'm a basketball and a baseball fan personally, and I actually don't like soccer all that much, you cannot avoid not watching the World Cup, which takes place every 4 years. It's the biggest sports event outside of the United States every 4 years, kind of like the Olympics. Using your chat, if you guys could take a guess how many times the men's national soccer team has won the World Cup. Any number that you want to plug in there, I'd be curious on your take. I see 1, 0, 1, 1. 0 is correct. So we have a lot of educated soccer fans. 0 is absolutely correct. Men have never won the World Cup. Matter of fact, I think the men's team has never made it past the quarterfinals. They've never played in the semifinals. They've never played in the finals, let alone won any World Cup. How many World Cups, if you guys could use your chat, how many World Cups has the US women's national team won? Abby Sanders, you like soccer because you got it right on both questions. It is 4. The women's team has won 4 World Cups, which is absolutely impressive. Makes it one of the best national teams in the entire world in the history of the sport. For how long have the men had their own dedicated jersey? For how long have the men, you don't need to answer that because everybody knows the men have always had their own jersey. They've always had a jersey that was dedicated, designed for them, created for them. For how long have the women's national team, so the losers have always had their jersey. For how long have the actually successful women's team had their own jersey? Only since 2019. So in 2017, Nike commissioned a group to actually start, after already having won 3 World Cups, and then in 2019, they added another one. Nike commissioned a group to actually design a jersey that was not the knockoff of the male jersey. And by the way, commercially, it fared extremely well. Into the 2019 online on Nike.com, it was the #1 soccer jersey sold of men's and women's option, the women's national squad jersey. So similar things happen and are happening just because of the sheer fact that for the most part, the industry and other industries remain male dominated. What is the big deal about workwear anyway? So what is the importance of having proper personal protective equipment and high visibility safety apparel? At the first level, on the first instance, there are two big purposes. First purpose is protection. The other one is to support the performance of the person that is doing a specific job. Protection from what? Protection from the elements, the weather, whether it's rain, whether it's cold, whether it's heat, and clothing can help to protect against that, or the conditions of the specific work environment. If you're exposed to fire, if you're exposed to abrasive materials, if you're exposed to a lot of moving vehicles, moving parts, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the performance side, it is much more individual. But if a piece of clothing fits right, is comfortable, and helps you in mobility, is designed in a way that it helps in mobility, it can greatly enhance your performance on the job. And then obviously there are certain features. There are features that are needed for specific jobs. We talked about pockets briefly, but pockets that actually allow you to carry gear, to carry equipment, to store equipment. If you work in an environment where you have to wear gloves for the most part, whether it's because you have to handle and manage and operate tools or equipment, or whether it's because it's cold, and whether there are zipper pulls that are large enough to allow you not to take off the gloves, whether there are radio hooks. So clothing and workwear in this context supports both of those two purposes. It protects and it helps your performance. And that is also essentially the guideline on how workwear should be selected. You need to look at the work context. What are the demands of the job? Fit cannot be overstated because of its huge impact on the ability to perform. The quality aspects, which come down to garment construction and materials. You can have fast fashion, or you can have fashion that has actually been built, no pun intended, but has been built in a way that is made to last. And then the features that I've already hinted at. Over the course of the last decade, more and more innovation has actually also started to creep into workwear. Most of it coming from sports apparel. So you will find more and more workwear that pays attention to thermal management, moisture management, odor management, range of motion, pre-bent arms, gussets, so that when you have to lift your arms, not the entire jacket, not the entire coat comes up. It stays where it's supposed to stay, but you can still move your arms and have range of movement. Lightweight materials that nevertheless fulfill all of these other purposes. Lightweight, but still abrasive. Lightweight, but still insulating. So there's a lot that has come from outdoor and sports apparel and is starting to creep into workwear. And then there's the topic of sustainability. Sustainability, I think, in other apparel and fashion markets is more prevalent than in workwear, but it is starting to appear on the radar, certainly, of where material comes from, how it has been created, how much of it is recycled, et cetera, et cetera. So it's certainly something that has arrived on the radar. Now, I do want to briefly address a couple of things regarding high visibility safety apparel, because I think it is very interesting to get some knowledge about what regulates high visibility safety apparel. What is it for? All of you have industry background, so I don't need to spend too much time for it. It's either required by OSHA, MSHA, or by a regulatory body, or it's required by your employer. And essentially, the purpose of it is that when there are low light conditions, when there's poor visibility, when you're exposed to many moving vehicles, moving parts, then to be seen reduces the risk of serious injury, or in the worst case, a fatality. What regulates the properties that high visibility safety apparel needs to have? And that's the ANSI 107 standard. Last revision was in 2020. Before that, it was in 2015. The standard defines a number of different garment types. There's type O, type R, and type P. Type P for first responders and law enforcement. And for the most part, construction materials falls into type R. And there are two classes, subdivided into classes, class 2 and class 3, depending on the conditions of the specific site. where you're active or the activity that you are carrying out. The fact that I want to draw your attention to is how this standard works and what are the requirements that have to be met. There is background material, which is this fluorescent yellow or fluorescent orange material. And then there is the retroreflective tape, the retroreflective or combined performance material. And the standard defines absolute square inches that have to be met at a minimum in order to receive certification and be in compliance. So to meet a type R class 2, which is very common in construction, the garment has to have at least 775 square inches of that fluorescent background material, and it has to have just slightly more than 200 square inches of that retroreflective tape. Now, if you consider that a woman's t-shirt, and this is just one example, but a woman's t-shirt on average needs 12 to 18% less fabric, then that in conclusion means that it is much harder to meet that absolute standard for a woman's t-shirt on the smaller size range than it is for a men's t-shirt. So both of these, the men's t-shirt on the left and the women's t-shirt on the right, both of them have to meet that absolute standard. 201 square inches of retroreflective material, 775 square inches of that fluorescent background material. For us, as we went through certification of our, at Liberty, of our high-vis collection, we received class 2 easily. For the most part, our jackets and coats would receive class 3. We haven't gone through that approval process yet, but we would easily receive that. It was a challenge for our class 2 shirt that you see here, and then also for our high-vis vests. Why? Because high-vis vests, by the very nature of being vests, have even less fabric because they have no sleeves. And for the t-shirts, if we wanted to, and we wanted to design a properly fitting shirt without too much excess fabric, we actually had to go through 3 iterations. We had to go through 3 iterations, sending our samples off, it coming back that we hadn't hit those absolute numbers, us having to tweak and make changes without violating our mission until we finally hit that. So it was not easy in real life. That is something that was definitely a hurdle. Now, why does fit matter? So it matters because for the most part, on average, there are certain physical differences between men and women. Why can't women simply wear as small as men's size? Well, shrinking and pinking doesn't cut it because women are not a small size of men. Men come in all sizes and shapes, as do women. There are no 2 individuals that are exactly the same in all their body configurations, certainly not over time. So I'm talking about averages. Not each one of you will find themselves in what I'm about to present. Those are averages among the genders. They're purely medians. On average, women tend to be 5.5 inches shorter, and this is based on American men and American women. 5.5 inches shorter, almost an inch of less head circumference, almost 2 inches less in shoulder width, almost 2 inches less in wrist circumference, almost an inch less in hand length, which explains the problems with male glove that are tried to make fit on female hands. Less weight overall, about 30 pounds less. And then the big one, which is less waist circumference, but a greater hip circumference. So the delta, the waist to hip ratio, the waist to hip delta, which for men is minimal, or sometimes there is none. It's a 1-1 relationship between waist and hip. For women, there is obviously a large delta on average between waist and hip circumference. And that to a great extent explains why, if you have a male t-shirt, a male jacket, a male coat, and even if the size is theoretically the right one, and it somehow fits, there's a lot of excess fabric and it doesn't sit right at the hips. It doesn't sit right at the waist. And by the way, women for the most part tend to have a chest that is larger than men's. So what happens when you have ill-fitting workwear, when you have workwear which tends to be too large because it's men's workwear and women are forced to wear it? Head protection, tip forward, or it slides around. Eye protection that is too large, that covers 3/4 of a woman's face. You have the danger of, or the hazard of entry of objects and materials. Pants that are too long is a slip, trip, and fall hazard. Workwear where you have a lot of excess fabric is a hazard of caught in between off that excess fabric. Gloves that are not tactile enough because they don't fit snugly, they don't fit properly. It relates to not being able to handle machinery or equipment and tools properly. Again, pants and sleeves can lead to that don't fit, that are too long, can lead to caught in machinery. And what is the natural thing that you do when you're wearing something that doesn't fit you right? And you have to perform a job over many hours, 8, 10, 12-hour workday. The natural thing to do is that you're going to take it off. And so the very thing that is supposed to protect you, you're not even wearing it anymore because it is not allowing you to perform properly. And that is the next aspect. When you wear something that is too large, it is not only the safety aspects that are impacted, it is also your performance that is heavily impacted. It messes with your concentration if you constantly have a hard hat that tips forward. It messes with your concentration, certainly, if you have particles that enter on the side of your safety goggles. Try climbing a ladder with pants that don't fit you. Try taking up equipment, a ladder, with pants that don't fit you that you also somehow have to hold. You cannot use machinery and tools properly. In the worst case, the discomfort turns into pain. Think about boots that you have to wear that don't properly fit over an 8, 10, 12-hour workday, and it may result in significant pain and discomfort. So just taking a short break because we've seen quite a few things already. Just to recap what I've talked about so far. Workwear is important. It's important because it has functional properties, but it's also important because there are cultural norms and it allows you to fit in. For the most part, women in the construction industry do not receive gender-specific PPE. The reasons for that are plentiful. I think 2 stand out. One is genuine ignorance. The other one is gender bias, but there are a number of other reasons. Workwear is important because it protects you from the elements and the conditions at your workplace, but it also allows you to perform. When you have ill-fitting workwear, it almost becomes a hazard in itself, and women cannot perform their tasks properly. Now, before moving on, are there any questions at this point? I always, when I have these conversations, I always say safety comes to mind first, and I agree with it 100%. But equally important, and I think oftentimes even more important, are the psychological implications of not having proper PPE or of having proper PPE. And that is something that I would like to briefly explore in the following section. Our moms, for the most part, were right when they taught us that first impressions matter. It is hard to correct the first impression, and dress for success. And that has been proven by a number of studies over many, many decades. As human beings, as much as we'd like to think of ourselves as being very advanced and intellectual Homo sapiens that do not judge other people, don't judge the book by its cover, the truth is naturally we are wired to make snap judgments based solely on the appearance of other people. Within the first 100 milliseconds, so literally within the blink of an eye, we assess whether we find somebody attractive and trustworthy. within the first 3 seconds, we make assumptions about a person's personality. Very basic. Is that somebody that is easygoing and nice, or is that somebody that's a little bit dark and possibly rude? And about a person's competence. Is that somebody who's competent or incompetent? And in the first minute, we draw assumptions purely based on appearance on a whole slew of different variables. Not all of them are listed here, but we draw assumptions about the status of the person, whether that person has leadership material, whether it's successful from a materialistic point of view or not, whether it's a person that is dateable, a friend or a foe, smart or rather shallow. And all of that happens within seconds or within the first minute. What gives us the clues? The clues is entirely based on what people look like. And clothing plays a huge part of that. Look at these two people here. You have a woman who stands in a pose that exudes a certain level of confidence, certain level of trustworthiness. Her hair is shiny and nice. She wears clothes that are well fitting her. She's wearing shoes that are heels. And then you have this guy that's wearing an overall, kind of like a funny pose, probably thinks he's a funny guy, wearing some glasses. His haircut is interesting, sneakers. Who would you ask when you're standing in line to just briefly watch your kids? So the clues that we take are multifold. They range from the jewelry, wearing jewelry, not wearing jewelry, big jewelry, small jewelry, makeup, no makeup, a lot of makeup, very little makeup. How do we wear the clothes? Tight, loosely. Shape of the face, the symmetry of the face, the pose, the way that we walk, whether we're taking care of ourselves because we're well groomed or not. Glasses can totally change what we think of somebody, what conclusions we draw. We think that person is smart or not. Weight. Is it a person that is possibly obese? And we draw a bunch of make a bunch of assumptions about that. Skin color, very important. Race, ethnicity. And we have never even talked or listened to what any of these people have to say. So in this picture, in our industry and in the work environment, that certainly holds true as well. So in the construction industry, there is no difference. At the workplace, the same thing happens. We draw conclusions within seconds about another person with all of these visual clues, including clothing. Who on this photo do you believe holds the highest rank? Now, probably nobody will speak up, so I will just call out Abby because I know her.
Which one would hold the highest rank?
Who holds the highest rank? So this is a crew in the Pacific Northwest. I think it's the second largest construction company in the United States. And this picture was taken, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago. And there's one person on this picture that managed this crew.
The person on the far right, which Janine also said.
The person on the far right, the tall gentleman with his safety goggles and a confident stance.
Yep, that one.
Yeah. And you draw that from the appearance. And it is actually the young lady that stands right in front of him. The one that is wearing an oversized high-vis coat, who's not comfortable with her safety goggles, who appears to be wearing a hard hat that is too big. She is was at that time the one that managed that crew. She's a force of nature. She's an amazing woman that works out of Seattle for Hansel Phelps. She's climbing up the ranks. She was embarrassed and had to hesitate whether she was going to give me this picture. When I told her a couple of years ago that I was putting together a presentation for NAWIC, and she told me I have to think about it. I'm just really still embarrassed by that. And that is just because of the way that she appears, not what she's capable of doing, but because of the conclusions that other people would draw from just looking at this. Even among the 3 women, she doesn't look like, so if we blend out all the men on this photo and just look at the 3 women, it looks to me, if I first look at this, the one on the left with the blue hard hat is the one out of the 3 that's probably the one that's, got something to say there. The one with the blue hard hat was a lady that worked in the corporate office in marketing. The one in the orange jacket with the red hard hat is an intern. And the one in marketing was the one that went out and somehow tried to find a safety jacket and some safety gloves on her own. Cabri here in this picture, she's the one that, wears what was supplied to her. Not to a surprise, women on average are much more conscious and feel much more pressure about how they look than men. A Pew Research study conducted in 2017 showed that about 71% of women feel pressure to be physically attractive, which starts very early from a very young age. Now, the surprise probably to some of you is that, interestingly, only 3 out of 4 men do not care about their looks. 3 out of 4 men do not feel pressure to be physically attractive. So just imagine how nice that must be, and how you can walk through life if that pressure is taken off. As mothers tend to say, first impressions matter, and we've talked about that. But the other important thing is to dress for success. Why? Because it has an impact on how others judge you and the conclusions that they draw. But interestingly, it also has an impact on yourself, on the belief in your capabilities, which then translates into your level of self-efficacy, which is your confidence in being able to carry out desired tasks, which then translates into job satisfaction. I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are interesting psychological concepts and a bunch of studies have been done in this regard. But there is the concept of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias can have the halo effect, where the perception is a positive one, and it leads to having a positive attitude toward a person because of the clues that you're receiving visually. And you think, it's a dumb example, but she's very pretty, she's nice hair. I'm pretty sure she's very kind. I'm pretty sure she's great with kids. And then there's the reverse halo, where you have a negative perception of somebody only merely based on the way that they appear. And then there's it is hard to correct first impressions, the horn effect, the assumptions that people have made about you based solely on appearance over a period of time without having truly interacted with you are hard to reverse. They will linger, and to reverse those takes an effort, even though you have never truly interacted with the person. They have only seen you, and they have drawn assumptions about you, about your level of competence, whether you're leadership material, whether you're trustworthy, whether you're a friend or a foe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Studies have also been carried out about what's called enclosed cognition, the effect of clothing that it has on yourself, how you think, feel, and also how you function. There's a brief 2-minute video, but we only have 10 minutes left. So I'm just briefly going to explain what was done. And this experiment has been carried out a number of times, and it's consistently proven. Group A, Group B in a study environment. Group A wears their natural street clothes. Group B is given lab coats. Then they have to perform a number of tasks, primarily tasks that have to do with concentration and focus. And Group B with the lab coats consistently outperforms Group A. Second part of that example, Group A also receives lab coats, but they're all told that those are painters' lab coats. Group B receive lab coats, and they're told that those are doctors' lab coats. Group B consistently outperforms Group A. Enclosed cognition. Our second skin truly has an impact on how we function, how confident we function, and that has an impact on our performance levels. Does that also hold true in the construction environment? Well, a specific study was carried out in 2013 with tradeswomen, and they established a correlation analysis was carried out, which compared their level of satisfaction with personal protective equipment, or personal protective clothing in this case, and a number of variables that were either related to the garments or entirely unrelated to the garments. The highest correlation of the women that were highly satisfied with their workwear was with confidence. That was the highest single correlation. The second one was with the weight of the garment, which was very interesting to me, because I think that plays out a little bit differently for men. But then the next ones were fit and obviously feeling more safe, feeling more protected in personal protective clothing that they were highly satisfied with. And the regression analysis found a direct correlation with a high degree of satisfaction with your workwear, a high degree of self-efficacy, that is essentially the confidence that you had in carrying out the job and the task at hand, and a high degree of job satisfaction. So we talked about safety. Workwear has a direct impact on safety. It has a direct impact on performance, but it has a direct impact on confidence. And confidence is key because confidence then impacts everything else. A person that is confident, and obviously there's a fine line, and I know there are probably some health and safety professionals on this call. People that are overconfident are oftentimes the ones that commit, that do not work safely. But there is also a positive correlation between a confident person and how safely they operate. A confident person tends to outperform. A confident person tends to have a high degree of job satisfaction. And that in turn leads to people actually staying in the job longer and higher job retention. Now, very briefly, just to give you an idea of the solutions that are currently out there, I always refer to it as field workwear, but so gear for heavy duty industries, and then high-vis safety apparel. On the field workwear side, I think over the last 10 years, quite a bit has happened. Carhartt has certainly invested money into amplifying their range that they make available for women. Do the trading company, same thing. Patagonia, the outdoor company, has started women's and men's workwear collections. Liberty is there now. Dovetail has certainly made a name for itself, especially when it comes to pants. And a lot of tradeswomen absolutely love Dovetail. Red Ants Pants is one of their competitors. Zena and Junior Jones make boots for women in industries ranging from manufacturing to construction. And there's Rockport. There are fewer options, but there are definitely some options now in the high-vis safety apparel side. Kashigo, Radiance, GSS, NSA are established brands that have for decades catered to men primarily, but have now started to add some garments for women. I think, honestly, as somebody who monitors that very closely, Utility Pro has a very solid collection by now for women's high-vis, and us, even as a startup, it is I think we stand out in the range of clothes that we have. We have two collections. We have an all-day collection, which is our field work collection. We have a heavy-duty denim coat that is insulated. We have a work vest that has shearling insulation, and then for the colder regions of the country, we have a canvas coat that has thermal insulation, and we have a pair of pants that has 6 total pockets, reinforced knees, and even tool holders. And then on the high-vis side, with the exception of one high-vis shirt that is not certified, everything else is Class 2 certified. We have t-shirt, soft shell jacket, coat, a mesh vest, and an insulated vest, and a bomber jacket. Why is change necessary, and what has to be done? Well, ever since I entered the industry, and that was a while ago, people have been predicting the skilled labor shortage. And that has not changed because we do not have enough skilled labor entering those professions, as are the ones that are exiting. So we're literally still facing, and it's not getting significantly better, millions of jobs that are not being that are not being filled, especially in construction, but also across pretty much all trades. On top of that, as more women have entered the armed forces, we have more and more women that are now reaching an age where they exit as veterans the armed forces. And we're getting to a point where we have about 2 million women exiting the armed forces every year in the United States. A lot of those women are prime candidates for these type of industries. Why? Because they worked in male-dominated environments, and oftentimes they worked manual jobs or jobs that required a certain degree of manual activity. And then the most recent pandemic has actually, unlike all the recessions since the 1980s, predominantly affected women more when it comes to unemployment than men. Previous recessions, men fell in greater numbers into unemployment than the last one, which is obviously explained by the type of industries that were primarily affected, hospitality and the likes, which employed more women. So we have more women actively looking for jobs. We have women that would be prime candidates exiting the armed forces. We have a clear labor shortage. So all of those conditions should actually lend themselves to doing something and offering women the type of gear that they need. And you guys may remember one of my earlier slides was about what are the reasons for the lack of proper PPE for women, and many of those actions that now have to be taken answer directly to those. So we need to educate stakeholders about the need, whether that's employers, unions, apprenticeship programs, associations across the board, raise the awareness about existing options, push for regulatory change. I think that's a big one. That's something where truly associations like CALCIMA and others can help by pushing regulators, ANSI, OSHA, MSHA, to change the requirements and clearly specify that it has to be gender specific. I think manufacturers of workwear, but also employers, unions, interest groups need to actively seek feedback from women and cannot rely on saying there are no complaints, so there's no problem. I think that's a wrong conclusion. And then clearly we need to drive and commit and hold stakeholders accountable. Again, I come back to my hypothesis. You cannot be serious as a company, as an organization about safety, you cannot be serious about wanting to attract more women, but then give women men's PPE. Those are clear contradictions, and change is possible. In 2015, in 2005, quite a while ago, then Mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, together with the Construction Council of New York City, did an experiment, and they said that they were going to reserve 10% of all new apprentice spots for women. They collaborated with an organization called NEW, Non-Traditional Employment for Women, and their inquiries directly more than tripled, and they were able to fill those spots. So when the goals are set and when some resources are put aside to achieve that, women follow the call to a great extent. The United States Army in 2008 started a commission to study for combat uniforms for women as more women were entering combat roles. And in 2013, they launched gender-specific combat uniforms for women that were markedly different from men's combat uniforms. And then I had already talked about the women's national team for soccer and how Nike addressed that, and now finally the more successful women's squad has a jersey of their own. And that, hopefully, I was able to give you some information about this, give you some ammunition, and present some interesting facts and data to you around this topic, and shows you why it is so important that women receive the PPE that they need and that fits well. And I think, Abby, it is 3 o'clock on the dot, but I'm happy to do some Q&A right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Tobias. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you feel more comfortable putting it in the chat, please do.
I have a question. Megan Neal with PW Gillibrand. Do you have any plans to create safety vests that are breakaway? It looked like the options that you have are zippered.
Yes, correct. They were both zippers. There are a lot of things that we have in the works, and there are a lot of ideas that we have, to have a real a surveyor vest. I think our mesh vest has a lot of room for improvement. I think all the other garments are pretty solid. But yes, I think there's a lot of things that we want to do, and breakaway is one of those things. But we also want to add polo shirts, long sleeve shirts, overalls, coveralls. So there's just a lot that I think is still needed. I hope, and that's something that I always say, I hope that other companies will follow suit and will offer some of those other styles that we're currently not offering. Because there are a lot of different workwear companies out, and they can all coexist. And I think the exact same thing can happen in women's workwear. I think it's perfectly fine. And the more the merrier, because it creates more awareness. And as I had mentioned, I think a big reason right now why it's not there is the lack of awareness among men and women. Believe it or not, there are a lot of women that are entirely unaware that these options exist right now.
Thank you.
I'm reading the comments, and I see that Janine Oliver said, the irony of that photo is Capery is amazing. Absolutely right. And that is the irony of appearance and not being able to, not that she didn't want to, but not being able to wear clothes that properly fit. And it does not then elude the type of characteristics that you would expect from the team lead, the project supervisor. That Capery is the lady that managed that crew in that photo that I showed earlier. But that's why I always say that everybody immediately defaults to thinking about the safety aspects of ill-fitting PPE. And if there's one thing that I hope that you can take away from this webinar today is that the psychological impacts are the same as or even more important, I believe. I can definitely say that when I entered the industry, and I was always in management roles, when I started in Germany for Cemex, one of the first things, because Cemex has a culture that is drives to be physically present at plant sites, at job sites, there's a strong culture around that. So you have to have gear. And one of the things that I immediately did and that I enjoyed greatly was to buy some high-vis gear, some cool Red Wing boots. I did the same thing when I transferred to the United States because gear is a little bit different, and I wanted to fit in, look the part, but also it's something that's truly enjoyable, and to a great extent, women are robbed of that very opportunity. Any more questions? Stephanie, do you have a question?
Oh, she's on mute, but I don't think she has.
Thank you. I don't really have a question for you, but I have a question for the participants. Do you guys, the producer members, think that your employers are going to, based on what we've learned today, start considering offering women's workwear? Maybe that means no. Is there anything that can be done for that to perhaps change? We will be in our next issue of the Conveyor, which is themed safety, have an article about this as a follow-up. So perhaps it's something that management can take a look at.
All right. Well, you have my contact details. If I can ask you, please follow us. We are a family-owned business and we're a startup. So any ability to spread the news is much appreciated. So please follow us on the social media platform of your choice. And if you have any follow-up questions, if there's anything that stood out, if you want to seek additional information, My email address is tobias.p@liberty.com. You can always contact us at hello@liberty.com. Please feel free to reach out.
And thanks to you and Abby for setting this up.
I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, well, thank you again, Tobias. And then if anybody still needs to get in contact with him, you can always reach out to me and I'm happy to connect you as well. All right, well, that concludes it for today. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.